Well, maybe another world can. There you go. That's awesome. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we'll get started. So anyway, I'm Jonathan Bartlett, and I'm a computer programmer by day, and as a side thing, I'm the director of the Blythe Institute, and we do independent research in creation and intelligent design. And we've been doing it for about 4 years. So anyway, so the first sheet that you got there, the one sheet slide thing, is what we're going to go over first. And this is kind of just a quick overview of, where evolution is in culture and how it can be used as a springboard for talking about creation. So start out, our kids are always exposed to non-Christian worldviews, okay? And then evolution is used to kind of give a scientific basis for that worldview, to kind of give it an air of respectability, okay? And so, and evolution also allows the media to push evolution as if it's not pushing a worldview, okay? And so it makes it sound impartial, even though it's very partial. So there's all sorts of things like Jurassic Park and Pokemon that all promote this evolutionary idea. And now, as Christians, we're not called to hide from the world or to fear the world, but to engage with it. So anyway, the solution to this is to take the bad and to find and turn it into good. So there's several things that we can do with these evolution encounters. First of all, is we can teach our kids to practice discernment. Okay, that all through your life, you have to there are things that come at you that contain both good and bad. And you have to discern which is which. You have to test all things and hold fast to the good. And that's one of the things that we can really practice with different evolutionary ideas. Then we can also use them as learning opportunities. It's good for us to know our own viewpoint, but it's even better to know what other people's ideas are. Okay, because that way we're not just living in a vacuum. There's a whole world going on around us, and we need to not be ignorant of the things going on. And so we need to know not only what they believe, but also why they believe it. In fact, that's one of the main differences between different belief systems, is that you come out with why they use different rationalizations and groundings for their different worldviews. And so once you understand why different people believe the way they believe, then it becomes a lot more easy to understand what they believe and how they came to that conclusion. And then importantly, when we're doing this, we need to be careful not to create straw man arguments against the other side, because what happens is those always backfire. If you erect a straw man, what's going to happen is once your child sees the real version of it, they're going to realize that they've been given a wrong story. Okay, and we want to make sure that our kids know that they can come to us for truth, and that when we don't know, we just say we don't know. But if we try to front something that's not true or make someone look worse than they are, then that will always come back to bite you. So what we need to do is teach our kids to take other people's ideas seriously, but pull them in under the lordship of Christ. So, the first example is Pokemon, okay? I don't know if you all have kids who play Pokemon, okay? There's a lot of people, our kids like Pokemon, their friends like Pokemon, and but one of the core concepts is that you have these character cards, and they evolve, okay? And so evolution is actually at the center of what's happening in Pokemon, okay? Well, the thing is that if you look at it carefully, and we'll get into this later, but the concept of creation is not completely separate from evolution. There is evolution within creation. God had the original created kinds, and out of them evolved individual species. So, for example, there's kind of the cat kind, where you have kittens and lions, and they're all the same created kind, but they're different species, okay? And this is actually, if you pay careful attention to the evolution that happens in Pokemon, you realize that this is the same kind of evolution that happens in Pokemon. They have different types of cards, different types of characters that evolve along specific lines. And so you actually wind up that you can use the evolution in Pokemon to teach about creation. And one of the things that I think is interesting about that is that the people who created Pokemon, in order to come up with a sensible idea, had to make evolution more like creation to make it work. So it's just kind of interesting. You can use that and you can say, here's some people who wanted to show you evolution, but they just couldn't help themselves but to show you creation too. And so anyway, I just think it's really interesting. And the Pokemon evolution is goal-directed. There is an end in mind. And so it's a very, you can talk about the different ideas within evolution and what parts we can agree with, what parts we disagree with, and what makes sense within a worldview. And then there's also Jurassic World. I don't think anyone's gone 5 minutes without hearing someone talking about Jurassic World. I've got friends who's like, my child saw Jurassic World and now they want to be a paleontologist and that's all they can talk about. And everyone loves dinosaurs. They're awesome icons and they fill our minds with awe and wonder. But the media likes to use them to push evolutionary and old Earth agendas. So it's interesting because the dinosaurs are the perfect opportunity to discuss the differences between creation-based ideas and secular Earth history. So, we all live on the same world, okay? And the world has layers, okay? And so they're not all worldwide layers, but there's layers in the world. And so the difference between creation or actually technically old Earth and young Earth is the question of how do we interpret these layers, okay? And from an old Earth perspective, the layers indicate long passages of time. Each layer was you lay down a microscopic layer each year, and over millions of years, you get a thing of sediment a mile long, okay? But a creation-based worldview looks at Noah's flood as being the primary event to lay down most of the layers. And so what you get is these layers that are across the world are actually comes from Noah's flood, and the fossils we find are animals that were buried there. So the fossil record gives you kind of a glimpse of what life was like before the flood. And so I have a slide in there. Sixth one is an old Earth versus young Earth look at the rock layers. And so basically it kind of gives you the different scientific labels for the different geologic periods, what organisms are likely to find there, and what the old Earth view of those layers are and the young Earth view. So the top layers are the Cenozoic, and basically modern-like organisms. And everyone agrees these are kind of the modern layers. But then you have what's called the KT boundary, and for creationists, that's the end of the flood. And that is for old Earth theory, that's if you've heard about the meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs, that's what that is, okay? And so so basically it's a ring of sediment that's almost the entire planet where there's very few fossils, okay? And so the reason is either because there was a whole bunch of things that died at one time, or because it was the end of the flood and nothing has come back and repopulated yet. Okay, so those are two different ways of looking at that. And so, and you can see that there's kind of specific types of organisms that are kind of specific to each layer. And the reason for this is, from a creation point of view, isn't because of time, it's actually because of ecosystems. You'll notice that the things that are at the bottom of the layers all exist underwater. They were the first things that were buried by the flood. And so anyway, they kind of proceeds by zone. So dinosaurs, though, provide really interesting evidence for the flood. Because they always put them in the museums in these life positions, like they're running after someone, right? But that's not how they find them. Okay, when they find them, you don't get fossilized running after something. But there's very interesting things that are in the fossils that you rarely hear about. First of all, in the last 10 years, they've been finding soft tissues in dinosaurs. So you can actually, because previously they thought it was all rock, because after 65 million years, you'd imagine that any biological material would have gone away. Okay? But what they've been finding is that in pretty much every dinosaur bone they look at, they find existing biological material. Now, not a lot of people like that. A friend of mine, Mark Armitage, found biological tissue in a Triceratops horn, and he published it, and then was fired. So anyway, now and then on top of that, nearly every dinosaur fossil that's been uncovered gives some evidence of being buried by the flood. So, because usually, if you ever look at a dinosaur fossil that was as it was found, it will almost always have its head arched way back. And the reason for that is because that is what organisms do when they can't breathe. Okay? Now, in order to be encased in rock like that, because some people went out and, because this is noticed by both creationists and evolutionists, okay? And it used to be thought that there was a ligament that dried out and it caused their body to contort in that way, okay? So these, a group of guys went out and they tested that, and they got a bunch of organisms and they killed them and they put them out in the sun to dry. Nothing happened, okay? So they concluded that, that these organisms died from some sort of asphyxiation, okay? Not only that, though, in order for your body to stay in that position, you have to be buried within a couple of hours of having suffocated, okay? Otherwise, your body goes limp and you go back to a more normal position. So all of these fossils are the result of asphyxiated dinosaurs that were buried within a couple of hours of being asphyxiated. And so the other, now you find a few dinosaurs that aren't in this position, but most of them show evidence of having been transported by water or dashed to bits. Okay, so all of those are kind of ideas you might have of things being buried in a flood. So anyway, you can take the current zeal for dinosaurs that comes out every time they put out a Jurassic Park or Jurassic World movie and use it as a springboard to talk about what dinosaurs really show about the history of the Earth. So then you have, then there's watching nature films. And anytime you watch a nature film, almost all of it is very heavily evolutionary. And so always remember that there's a difference between evidence and interpretation. And so it's always good to be careful about which one they're doing. Okay? And it's sometimes hard to tell because they don't always mark it well. And then, because oftentimes interpretation is presented as evidence. But you can use nature shows as practice for sorting out assumptions versus evidence versus interpretations. You can also use nature shows as opportunities to go and double check what people say. There's a whole bunch of resources that you can go to that can give you ideas. And I've given in the resources sheet, I gave a list of creation-based resources, but I also suggest that you also look at what the evolutionary point of view is. What do they say? Most of these are parts of larger conversations. So look and see what the creationists say, look and see what the evolutionists say. Get a variety of points of views, because there's not always just two. You know, sometimes there's 3, 4, or 5. So always keep an open mind to what you might be able to learn, but always also take every thought captive to the knowledge of Christ. And then if you want a creation-oriented set of videos, Elustra Media has some really nice ones. They've done some on metamorphosis. They just released one on sea creatures. They have a lot of really nice stuff. So anyway, I've got another section to go through, but at this point I just didn't know if there was any questions anyone had.
Are those films free online?
Most of them are purchased, but some of them are free online. So